The room was cold and white. Commander Vexthal sat in a chair that was too small for his large body. His blue skin looked pale under the bright lights. His forearms were folded across his chest. He had been a proud warrior once. Now he looked tired and old. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat across from him. She was a human woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Next to her sat Captain Jake Sullivan, a tall human man in a military uniform. Between them was a small recording device that blinked red. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Commander," Dr. Rodriguez said. Her voice was soft but serious. "We know this is difficult for you." Vexthal made a sound that humans might call a laugh, but it had no humor in it. "Difficult," he repeated, in his deep voice. "Yes, I suppose that is one word for it." Captain Sullivan leaned forward. "Commander, we need to understand what happened during the war. Your people filed complaints about our methods. They say we broke the rules of war." "Rules of war," Vexthal said, shaking his large head. "You humans have a strange idea about rules." Dr. Rodriguez opened a folder on the table. "The Galactic Council wants to know if humans used illegal weapons. Weapons that attack the mind instead of the body." "Illegal," Vexthal said again. He looked at both humans with his large dark eyes. "Tell me, Dr. Rodriguez, is it illegal to make a warrior forget why he fights? Is it illegal to make him dream of home when he should be thinking of battle?" The two humans looked at each other. Captain Sullivan wrote something in his notebook. "Commander," Dr. Rodriguez said, "please start from the beginning. Tell us about the first time you encountered human forces." Vexthal was quiet for a long moment. His breathing was slow and deep. When he spoke, his voice was distant, like he was seeing something far away. "I was fleet commander then," he said. "I led 3,000 ships into human space. We thought it would be easy. Your technology was good, but not better than ours. Your ships were fast, but ours were faster. Your weapons were strong, but ours were stronger." He paused and looked down at his hands. All four of them were shaking slightly. "We had fought many wars," he continued. "Against the Krellin Empire, against the Sorth Federation. We always won because we were better warriors. We were smarter. We were stronger. We followed the old ways of war." "What are the old ways?" asked Dr. Rodriguez. "You fight with honor," Vexthal said. "You attack military targets. You avoid civilian areas when possible. You announce your attacks. You give the enemy a chance to surrender with dignity. When you win, you take their territory. But you let them keep their culture and their pride." Captain Sullivan stopped writing and looked up. "And humans didn't follow these rules?" Vexthal made that sound like laughing again. "Rules. You humans don't break rules. You ignore them completely. You fight a different kind of war. A war we had never seen before." The commander stood up from his chair. He was very tall, almost 8 feet. He walked to the small window in the room and looked out at the gray sky of the neutral planet where they were meeting. "When we entered your space, we expected you to meet us in battle," he said with his back to them. "Ship against ship. Warrior against warrior. Instead, you ran away. All of you. Every human ship in the sector just disappeared." "That's a normal tactical retreat," said Captain Sullivan. Vexthal turned around. "No, Captain, not a retreat. You abandoned entire star systems. You left behind planets full of your own people. What kind of military abandons its own civilians?" Dr. Rodriguez made a note. "What happened next?" "We moved forward," Vexthal said, sitting back down. "We took system after system. No resistance. No fighting. It was too easy. My officers started to worry. Some said it was a trap, others said humans were just cowards." He rubbed his face with one of his hands. "I should have listened to the ones who said it was a trap." "Why?" asked Dr. Rodriguez. "What made you realize it was a trap?" "The messages," Vexthal said quietly. "On every planet we took, your people left messages for us, not threats or warnings. Questions. Questions about what? About why we were there, about our families back home, about what we hoped to gain from the war. They were written in perfect Zephyrian script, not just the language, but the old formal style that only our priests and scholars use." Captain Sullivan frowned. That doesn't sound very threatening. Vexthul looked at him with something that might have been pity. Captain, imagine if you were invading an alien world and everywhere you went, you found messages asking if your mother was proud of what you were doing. Messages asking if your children would understand why Daddy had to kill strangers. Messages asking if you remembered the last thing you said to your wife before you left home. The room was very quiet. Dr. Rodriguez stopped writing. At first my warriors laughed. Vexthul continued. They said humans were trying to make us feel bad like children, but the messages were so personal. They knew our customs. They knew our ceremonies. They knew our fears. How could they know so much about your culture? Asked Dr. Rodriguez. That was the first terrifying thing about you humans, Vexthul said. You study your enemies, not just their weapons or their ships. You study their hearts, their minds, their souls. He stood up again and began pacing around the small room. We had been at war for only 2 weeks and already my officers were having trouble sleeping. They were thinking about home instead of fighting. Some were asking to call their families. Did you let them? Of course not. We were at war. But the request kept coming. More and more every day. Strong warriors who had fought in a dozen battles were suddenly homesick like children. Vexthul stopped pacing and looked directly at Dr. Rodriguez. That was when I started to understand. You weren't fighting us with weapons, you were fighting us with our own feelings, our own love for our families, our own doubts and fears. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. Is that when you realized humans were different from other enemies you had fought? No, Vexthul said. That was just the beginning. The real horror was still coming. The red light on the recording device continued to blink in the silence that followed. Dr. Rodriguez poured water into 3 glasses. The sound seemed very loud in the quiet room. Commander Vexthul watched her hands as she moved. They were steady. His hands were still shaking. Commander, she said, pushing a glass toward him. You said the real horror was still coming. What happened next? Vexthul picked up the glass with 2 of his hands. The water was cold. He drank it slowly, as if he was buying time before he had to speak. The silence, he said finally. You humans stopped talking to us completely. Captain Sullivan looked confused. That doesn't sound scary. Most enemies try to jam our communications or send threats. That is exactly what we expected, Vexthul said. But you did something else, something we had never experienced in any war. He set down the glass and looked out the window again. A bird was flying past. It reminded him of the small flying creatures on his home world. We had been receiving your messages for 2 weeks, he continued. Those questions about our families and our reasons for fighting. Then on the 15th day of the war, everything stopped. Complete silence. No communications at all? Asked Dr. Rodriguez. Nothing. No radio signals. No data transmissions. No emergency broadcasts. It was like every human in the galaxy had simply vanished. Vexthul rubbed his temples with his lower pair of hands. At first we thought you were preparing for a major attack. My officers put all ships on high alert. We scanned every system looking for your fleet. But there was no attack, said Captain Sullivan. No attack. No ships. No humans anywhere. For 3 days, we moved through system after system and found nothing. Empty space stations, abandoned colonies, silent planets. The commander stood up and began pacing again. Do you understand what silence does to a warrior's mind, Captain? When you expect battle and find nothing, your imagination starts to work. You begin to think of all the terrible things that might be waiting for you. Dr. Rodriguez made notes while he talked. What did your soldiers think was happening? Some thought you were all dead. Some disease or disaster that killed every human in the sector. Others thought you were hiding, planning something terrible. A few thought you had simply given up and run away to another part of the galaxy. Vexthul stopped walking and faced them both. But I knew better. I had fought many wars. I knew that silence was just another weapon. I just didn't know how you planned to use it. When did the silence end? Asked Captain Sullivan. On the 3rd day we found one of your colonies, a farming planet called New Kansas. Population of about 50,000 humans. When we arrived, The planet was empty. Every human was gone. But they had left something behind. The commander sat back down. His breathing was getting faster, like he was remembering something that scared him. What did they leave? Dr. Rodriguez asked gently. A message, but not like the others. This one was different. It was carved into the ground of the main city. Letters 100 feet tall so we could see them from orbit, written in our sacred script. What did it say? Bexthal closed his eyes. It said, "We know you are afraid to go home without victory. We know you miss the sound of your children laughing. We know you dream of your mates cooking. We know you wonder if this war is worth dying for." The room was very quiet. The recording device blinked red in the silence. That was when I realized, Bexthal continued, that the silence wasn't about hiding from us. It was about making us think, making us remember what we had left behind, making us question why we were there. Captain Sullivan frowned. But that's just psychological warfare. Many armies use it. No, Captain. What you did next was not normal psychological warfare. Bexthal opened his eyes and looked directly at Dr. Rodriguez. Tell me, Doctor, what do you know about Zephyrian funeral rites? She looked surprised by the question. I know they are very important to your culture, very sacred. Yes. When a Zephyrian warrior dies in battle, we sing the Song of Crossing. It helps his spirit find its way to the ancestral realm. The song must be sung by his family or his closest battle brothers. It cannot be sung by strangers or enemies. Why are you telling us this? Asked Captain Sullivan. Because that is when your silence ended, Bexthal said. Not with threats or demands for surrender. You began broadcasting funeral songs for my soldiers who were still alive. Dr. Rodriguez stopped writing. I don't understand. Every human ship in the sector began transmitting the Song of Crossing in perfect Zephyrian, with the names of my warriors, describing their families back home, their children, their mates, their parents. You sang funeral songs for living soldiers, as if they were already dead. The commander's voice was getting louder. Do you understand what that does to a warrior's mind? To hear your own funeral song while you are still breathing? To hear strangers singing about your family as if you will never see them again? Captain Sullivan put down his pen. That's incredibly disturbing. It gets worse, Bexthal said. The songs were not just generic funeral rites. They were personal. You knew the names of my officers' children. You knew their favorite foods. You knew their hobbies. You sang about Sub-Commander Kethral's daughter who was learning to fly. You sang about Lieutenant Vex Nor's mate who was expecting their first egg. Dr. Rodriguez looked pale. How could we possibly know such personal details? That is what terrified us, Bexthal said. We realized that while we had been preparing for war, you had been studying us, not just our military, our people, our families, our private lives. He stood up again and walked to the wall. There was a small crack in the white paint that he traced with one finger. The funeral songs played for 6 hours, he said quietly. 6 hours of hearing our own death sung by the enemy. 6 hours of being reminded of everyone we would never see again if we died in this war. What effect did it have on your troops? Asked Dr. Rodriguez. Chaos, Bexthal said simply. Warriors who had fought bravely for decades began crying like children. Officers requested permission to contact their families immediately. Some soldiers became so upset they couldn't perform their duties. He turned back to face them. And then you stopped. Complete silence again. No funeral songs. No messages. Nothing. For how long? Another day. 24 hours of waiting and wondering what you would do next. 24 hours for my warriors, to think about those funeral songs, to imagine their families receiving news of their deaths, to wonder if this war was worth dying for. Bexthal sat back down and picked up his water glass. His hands were shaking more now. That was when I knew, he said, that we were not fighting a normal enemy. We were fighting an enemy that could weaponize our own love for our families. An enemy that could make us homesick in the middle of a battle. An enemy that understood us better than we understood ourselves. Dr. Rodriguez looked at Captain Sullivan. They both seemed uncomfortable. "Commander," she said, "what happened when you finally encountered human forces directly?" Vexthul smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "That, Doctor, is when the real nightmare began." The afternoon sun was getting lower outside the window. Commander Vexthul had been talking for hours, but he showed no signs of getting tired. If anything, he seemed more alert now, like telling these stories was waking up old memories that had been sleeping. Dr. Rodriguez refilled her coffee cup. Captain Sullivan was on his third notebook. The recording device kept blinking its red light. "Commander," Dr. Rodriguez said, "you mentioned that the real nightmare began when you encountered human forces directly. Can you tell us about that?" Vexthul nodded slowly. "It was the 22nd day of the war. We had been dealing with your silence and your funeral songs. My officers were shaken, but they were still soldiers. I thought we could handle whatever you did next." He laughed that bitter laugh again. "I was very wrong." "What happened?" asked Captain Sullivan. "We received a priority message from High Command. Fleet Admiral Kethamore himself was coming to take control of the operation. He was bringing reinforcements, fresh troops who had not been affected by your psychological games." Vexthul picked up his water glass and drank deeply. Admiral Kethamore was a legend among our people. He had never lost a battle. He was old and wise and very, very angry about what you humans had done to my warriors. Did his arrival help your situation? At first, yes. The fresh troops had not heard the funeral songs. They had not been exposed to your questions about family and home. They were ready to fight a proper war. The commander stood up and walked to the window. The Admiral's flagship was a massive vessel, the Eternal Sword. It carried 5,000 warriors and enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her notes. "That sounds like it would have been a significant advantage." "It should have been," Vexthul said. "But you humans had been busy while we were dealing with your silence. You had been preparing something new, something that none of us could have imagined." He turned back to face them. "The Admiral's ship arrived in our staging area at dawn. All of my officers gathered for a command meeting. We were discussing battle plans when Admiral Kethamore walked into the room." Captain Sullivan frowned. "That sounds normal." "Yes, it did sound normal. Except for one thing. Admiral Kethamore was already in the room. He had been there for 10 minutes before Admiral Kethamore walked in." The two humans stared at him. Dr. Rodriguez put down her pen. "I don't understand," she said. "Two identical Admiral Kethamores," Vexthul explained. "Both wearing the correct uniform. Both knowing all the right codes and passwords. Both with the same scars from old battles. Both with the same way of speaking." The room was very quiet. "One of them was human," Vexthul continued. "But we could not tell which one. They looked exactly the same. They sounded exactly the same. They even smelled the same." Captain Sullivan was writing very fast now. "How is that possible? Your technology is more advanced than we thought. Somehow you can change your appearance completely. Not just clothing or makeup, your actual body shape, your skin color, your voice, everything." Vexthul began pacing again. Both admirals gave orders. Different orders. One said to attack immediately. The other said to wait for more intelligence. Both orders sounded reasonable. Both admirals acted like they were the real one and the other was an imposter. "What did you do? What could we do?" "We tried to figure out which one was real. We asked questions only the real admiral would know. They both knew the answers. We checked their DNA. It was identical. We scanned them for human technology. Nothing." The commander stopped pacing and faced them directly. "For 6 hours we argued about which admiral was real. Our entire command structure was paralyzed. We could not make any decisions because we did not know who was really in charge." Dr. Rodriguez looked disturbed. "That's diabolical." "It gets worse," Vexthul said. "While we were trying to figure out the admiral situation, similar things started, happening all over the fleet. Officers would report to meetings and find themselves already there. Soldiers would go to their posts and find other versions of themselves on duty. How many humans had infiltrated your fleet? We never knew. That was the point. Maybe it was dozens. Maybe it was hundreds. Maybe every third person we saw was a human in disguise. We had no way to tell. Vexthul sat back down. The paranoia spread like a disease. Soldiers stopped trusting their officers. Officers stopped trusting their subordinates. Everyone was suspicious of everyone else. What happened to your unit cohesion? It collapsed completely. You cannot fight a war when you do not know who your real allies are. We started requiring passwords every few minutes. We established identification procedures, but you humans adapted to everything we tried. The commander rubbed his face with all four hands. The fake officers were not just passive infiltrators. They started giving contradictory orders, changing battle plans, reassigning troops, creating confusion wherever they went. Captain Sullivan looked up from his notebook. How long did this go on? 3 weeks. 3 weeks of not knowing who we could trust. 3 weeks of second-guessing every order and every conversation. Vexthul's voice got quieter. But the worst part was not the confusion. The worst part was what it did to our minds. What do you mean? When you cannot tell who is real and who is fake, you start to question everything. You start to wonder if you yourself are real. You start to doubt your own memories and experiences. Dr. Rodriguez stopped taking notes. That sounds like a form of psychological torture. Yes, but it was more than that. You humans were not just confusing us. You were making us question reality itself. Vexthul stood up and walked to the corner of the room. There was a small plant there. He touched one of its leaves gently. I remember the day I started to break, he said without looking at them. I was in my quarters reviewing battle reports when my second-in-command walked in. Sub-Commander Thexelia. I had known her for 15 years. We had fought together in 4 wars. What happened? She started talking about our shared experiences. Battles we had fought, victories we had won. But some of the details were wrong. Small things, but wrong. He turned back to face them. I corrected her. She insisted her version was right. We argued about it. Then she showed me a video recording of one of our old battles. In the recording, the events happened exactly as she remembered them, not as I remembered them. Dr. Rodriguez and Captain Sullivan exchanged worried looks. I began to doubt my own memory. Vexthul continued. If I could not trust my own recollections of events I had personally experienced, what could I trust? Was she human? I never found out. That was the genius of your strategy. It did not matter if she was human or not. The doubt was already planted in my mind. Once you start questioning your own memories, you start questioning everything. Vexthul sat back down. He looked very tired now. Within a month, half of my officers were having similar experiences. Conversations with people they thought they knew, but who remembered things differently. Meetings that may or may not have actually happened. Orders that may or may not have been real. How did it end? It did not end. That was the point. Even now, 3 years later, I sometimes wonder if the people I am talking to are really who they claim to be. I wonder if my own memories of this war are accurate or if they have been changed somehow. He looked directly at Dr. Rodriguez. I wonder if you are really human, or if you are one of my own people in disguise trying to extract information from me. Dr. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. Commander, I can assure you that I am human. Can you? Vexthul asked. How would I know? How would you know? If humans can look exactly like us, maybe we can look exactly like you. Maybe this entire interview is not what it appears to be. The red light on the recording device continued to blink in the silence that followed. The room had grown darker as the day passed. Dr. Rodriguez turned on a small lamp that cast long shadows on the walls. Commander Vexthul sat very still in his chair. He had not moved for several minutes. Commander, Dr. Rodriguez said gently. Are you all right? Vexthul blinked slowly like he was waking up from a dream. I was remembering, he said. Sometimes the memories feel more real than the present moment. Captain Sullivan looked concerned. We can take a break if you need one. No, Vexthul said firmly, I need to finish this. I need to tell you about the worst thing your people did to us. The thing that ended the war. He reached for his water glass, but his hands were shaking too much to pick it up. Dr. Rodriguez noticed and moved the glass closer to him. Thank you, he said. You are kind to an old enemy. You're not our enemy anymore, she replied. Vexthul looked at her with his large, dark eyes. That is exactly what I'm talking about, that kindness, that empathy. You humans turned it into a weapon. Captain Sullivan leaned forward. What do you mean? After weeks of not being able to trust anyone, after having our reality questioned, and our memories doubted, we thought we had seen the worst of human psychological warfare, but we were wrong. Vexthul finally managed to pick up his water glass and take a small sip. The final assault on our minds began on the 43rd day of the war. It started with a simple broadcast to all of our ships. What kind of broadcast? A human woman appeared on our screens. She was young, maybe 25 of your years. She had kind eyes and a gentle voice. She spoke perfect Zephyrian, better than some of our own people. The commander set down his glass and folded his hands in his lap. She said, Hello, warriors of the Zephyrian Empire. My name is Lisa Park. I am a doctor who studies how different species think and feel. I want to talk to you about your families. Doctor. Rodriguez wrote this down carefully. Dr. Lisa Park, I've heard that name before. She became famous after the war, Vexthul said, or infamous depending on your point of view. She was the architect of what you humans called the empathy campaign. What did she do? She talked about us. Not to us, but about us. She described our culture, our traditions, our values. But she did it in a way that made us sound beautiful and precious and fragile. Vexthul stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red. She talked about our mating ceremonies, he continued. How we choose partners for life and never love another after they die. She described the way we raise our young, how the whole community helps care for every child. She explained our art, our music, our poetry. That doesn't sound like psychological warfare, said Captain Sullivan. No, Vexthul agreed. It sounded like appreciation, like respect, like love. He turned back to face them, but then she started reading letters. Letters? Personal messages from our families back home. Letters from our mates, our children, our parents. Letters that had been sent to us through military communications. Dr. Rodriguez looked shocked. How did humans intercept private family messages? We never found out, but Dr. Park read them on the broadcast. Not just the words, but with emotion, with understanding. She would read a letter from a warrior's child and then explain to the audience what the child was really feeling. Vexthul began pacing again. She read a letter from Sub-Commander Gethkal's daughter. The little girl had written, Daddy, when are you coming home? I made you a drawing of our house with you in it. Dr. Park read this letter and then said, This child is not just missing her father. She is trying to keep him alive in her imagination. She draws him into her pictures because she is afraid he might disappear from her memory. The room was very quiet except for the sound of Captain Sullivan's pen on paper. The broadcast lasted for 3 hours. Vexthul continued. 3 hours? Of hearing our private family messages read aloud by the enemy. 3 hours of having our deepest feelings explained back to us by someone who understood them better than we did ourselves. How did your troops react? Many of them wept openly. These were veteran warriors who had seen battle on dozens of worlds, and they were crying like children. But they were not crying from sadness. They were crying from a kind of homesickness so deep it felt like physical pain. Vexthul sat back down heavily. Dr. Park did not mock us or threaten us. She made us beautiful. She made our families beautiful. She made our love for them beautiful. And that made the war feel ugly and wrong. Dr. Rodriguez put down her pen. I think I'm beginning to understand. The next day she broadcast again. This time she had video messages from our families. Not intercepted communications, but new messages. Messages that had been recorded specifically for the broadcast. Captain Sullivan looked confused. How could she have new messages from your families? Your people had contacted them directly. Somehow you had reached our homeworlds and spoken to our families. You told them their warriors were sad and lonely and far from home. You asked them to record messages of love and support. Vex Thul's voice was getting quieter. My own mate appeared on the screen, Vexathara. She looked tired and worried. She said, "My beloved, I know you are doing your duty, but I want you to know that I would rather have you home and alive than victorious and dead. Your children need their father more than the Empire needs another conquered world." There were tears in the commander's eyes now. She had never said anything like that before. In our culture, duty to the Empire comes before personal feelings. But hearing her say those words, seeing her face, he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Hundreds of my warriors saw similar messages from their own families. Messages saying, "Come home." Messages saying, "We love you more than we love victory." Messages saying, "This war is not worth losing you." Dr. Rodriguez handed him a tissue. "What effect did this have on your military?" "It destroyed us," Vex Thuli said simply. "Not our ships or our weapons, our will to fight. When your own family tells you that they value your life more than military success, how can you continue to risk that life in battle?" Did soldiers start deserting? Worse, they started surrendering. Not out of fear or cowardice, but out of love. They surrendered because they wanted to go home to the people who missed them. Vexthul blew his nose and tried to compose himself. Within a week, I had lost 30% of my force to voluntary surrender. Warriors were literally walking up to human positions with their hands raised, saying, "I want to go home to my family." Captain Sullivan stopped writing. "That's incredible." Dr. Park broadcast one final message. Vexthul continued. She appeared on screen again, but this time she was not alone. She was surrounded by Zephyrian warriors who had surrendered. They looked healthy and well-treated. They were smiling. What did she say? She said, "Warriors of the Zephyrian Empire, these are your brothers who have chosen love over war. They are safe. They are being cared for. And most importantly, they are going home to their families soon. You can make the same choice. You can choose love over war. You can choose life over death. You can choose family over empire." Vexthul looked at both humans. That broadcast ended the war, not the fighting, the war itself. My remaining officers came to me and said they could not ask their soldiers to fight when the enemy was offering them exactly what they wanted most, a chance to go home. "So you surrendered?" I surrendered. Not to save my ships or my career, but to save my warriors from the agony of choosing between duty and love. Dr. Park had made that choice impossible to bear. The commander was quiet for a long moment. Dr. Park understood something that we Zephyrians had never fully grasped. She understood that love is stronger than duty, that family is more important than empire, that the desire to protect and care for others is the most powerful force in the universe. Dr. Rodriguez looked sad. And she used that understanding as a weapon. "Yes," Vexthul said. "She weaponized our own capacity for love. She turned our greatest strength into our greatest weakness, and she did it not with hatred or cruelty, but with kindness and empathy." He looked directly at her. "That, Dr. Rodriguez, is what makes humans truly terrifying. You do not just destroy your enemies, you make them want to be destroyed. You make surrender feel like salvation." The recording device continued to blink red as silence filled the room. The lamp on the table cast a warm circle of light in the growing darkness. Commander Vexthul had been talking for most of the day. His voice was getting hoarse, but his eyes were still alert. Dr. Rodriguez and Captain Sullivan had filled 4 notebooks between them. "Commander," Dr. Rodriguez said softly, "you've told us about the war itself. But what happened after? How did your people recover from these psychological attacks?" Vexthul was quiet for a long time. He stared at his hands, turning them over and looking at the lines on his palms. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "We did not recover," he said. "That is what I have been trying to tell you. What your people did to us was not just warfare. It was a fundamental change in who we are as a species." "Captain," Sullivan looked up from his notes. "What do you mean?" "Before the war, we were a proud warrior race. We believed in duty above all else. We conquered worlds because we thought it was our right. We saw other species as inferior beings to be controlled or eliminated. Vexthul stood up and walked to the window. The last light of day was fading into night. After the war, we could not think that way anymore. Your Dr. Park had shown us that love was more important than conquest. That family was more valuable than empire. That other species had feelings and families just like us. Dr. Rodriguez set down her pen. That sounds like it could be a positive change. Perhaps, Vexthul said, but change forced on you by an enemy is different from change you choose for yourself. We did not become peaceful because we wanted to. We became peaceful because you broke our ability to be warriors. He turned back to face them. Do you know what happened to the Zephyrian Empire after the war ended? It was dissolved, said Captain Sullivan. Your people formed a confederation of independent worlds. Yes, because we could no longer believe in empire. Every time our leaders tried to talk about expanding our territory or controlling other species, we remembered Dr. Park's broadcasts. We remembered our families asking us to come home. We remembered choosing love over duty. Vexthul walked back to his chair but did not sit down. Our entire military structure collapsed, not because it was defeated but because our soldiers could no longer see the point of fighting wars. They wanted to go home to their families instead. Is that such a bad thing? Asked Dr. Rodriguez. For individuals? Perhaps not. But for a species that had defined itself through military strength for thousands of years, it was devastating. We lost our identity. We lost our purpose. We lost our understanding of who we were supposed to be. The commander finally sat down. Many of my former officers suffered from what your doctors call depression. They could not find meaning in civilian life after experiencing the intensity of military service. But they also could not return to military life because they no longer believed in the cause. Captain Sullivan was writing quickly. What about you, Commander? How did you cope with the transition? I did not cope well, Vexthul admitted. For 2 years after the war, I barely left my home. I could not trust my own thoughts and memories. Every conversation felt like it might be another human psychological operation. Every emotion felt like it might be artificially induced by some human manipulation. Dr. Rodriguez looked concerned. That must have been terrible. It was. But it was also educational. During those 2 years of isolation, I began to understand what your people had really done to us. You had not just defeated us in battle. You had reprogrammed our entire way of thinking. Vexthul leaned forward in his chair. You see, the most frightening thing about human psychological warfare is not that it works. The most frightening thing is that it works by making the victims believe that the new thoughts and feelings are their own. I don't understand, said Captain Sullivan. When Dr. Park showed us those family videos, we felt genuine love and homesickness. When she explained our emotions back to us, we felt genuine recognition. When we chose to surrender, we felt like we were making a free choice, based on our own values. The commander's eyes were intense now. But those were not our original values. Those were human values that had been carefully planted in our minds through weeks of psychological manipulation. You made us want what you wanted us to want. Doctor, Rodriguez stopped writing. Are you saying that your people's current peaceful nature is artificial? I am saying that we cannot tell the difference anymore. Are we peaceful because we learned that peace is better than war? Or are we peaceful because humans programmed us to be peaceful? How would we know? Vexthul stood up again and began pacing. This is what keeps me awake at night, Dr. Rodriguez. This uncertainty about my own thoughts and feelings. When I love my family, is that genuine emotion or human conditioning? When I feel guilty about the wars we fought before meeting humans, is that natural moral development or psychological manipulation? The room was very quiet except for the soft hum of the recording device. But there is something else, Vexthul continued. Something that I only realized recently. Something that makes this interview even more disturbing than the war itself. Captain Sullivan looked up sharply. What do you mean? Think about it, Captain. Why are you here? Why is the human government so interested in documenting the psychological methods used against us? Why do you want such detailed descriptions of how these techniques affected our minds? Dr. Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. We're investigating potential war crimes. Are you? Vexthal asked. Or are you studying these methods so you can use them again, so you can improve them, so you can be even more effective against the next species that opposes humanity? The commander stopped pacing and stood directly in front of their table. I have been talking for hours about the most traumatic experiences of my life. I have described in detail how my people's minds were broken and rebuilt. I have given you a complete analysis of our psychological weaknesses. Captain Sullivan put down his pen. Commander, I assure you that this interview is for historical purposes only. Is it, Captain? Then why are you taking such detailed notes? Why are you recording every word? Why do you ask such specific questions about which techniques were most effective? Vexthul sat back down, but his posture was tense now. You see, this is what I have learned about humans in the 3 years since the war ended. You never stop studying your enemies. You never stop gathering intelligence. You never stop preparing for the next conflict. Dr. Rodriguez felt uncomfortable. Commander, you're starting to sound paranoid. Am I paranoid, Doctor? Or am I finally seeing clearly? Vexthul looked directly at her. Tell me, what will happen to this recording after our interview is finished? She hesitated. It will be filed with the War Crimes Commission. And who has access to those files? Various government agencies that need the information for their work, including military intelligence, including psychological warfare specialists, including the people who might want to use these methods against other species in the future. Dr. Rodriguez did not answer. Vexthul smiled, but it was not a pleasant smile. You see, Doctor, I think this interview is itself a form of psychological operation. You are not just documenting what happened to us, you are studying us right now, today. You are observing how we think, how we react, how we process trauma. Captain Sullivan looked confused. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that humans never stopped waging psychological warfare against the Zephyrian people. You just changed the methods. Instead of Dr. Park's broadcasts, you now have interviews like this one. Instead of studying us from a distance, you now study us face to face. Vexthul stood up one final time. And the most brilliant part is that you have convinced us to cooperate. You have made us believe that talking about our trauma is therapeutic, that sharing our experiences is helpful, that this interview serves our interests instead of yours. He walked toward the door. I came here today thinking I was helping to document war crimes. Now I realize I may have just provided you with everything you need to commit new ones. Doctor, Rodriguez started to stand up. Commander, wait, where are you going? Vexthul paused with his hand on the door. I am going home, Doctor, to think about whether anything I believe or feel is really my own, or whether it is all just human programming that I am too broken to recognize. He opened the door and looked back at them one last time. Thank you for the interview. I hope you learned everything you wanted to know about the Zephyrian mind. I suspect you did. The door closed behind him. Dr. Rodriguez and Captain Sullivan sat in silence, staring at the red blinking light of the recording device. Outside, night had fallen completely, and the room felt very cold and very dark.